July 1944, Normandy. Inside a German Tiger tank, the world feels secure. 100 millimeters of steel armor guard the crew as they prepare for a counterattack, confident in their machine's legendary power. Suddenly, without warning, no sound of an approaching plane, no glint from a hidden gun, the world outside detonates. Dozens of high-explosive shells arrive in the same single instant. The crew is deafened, their optics shattered. Their predator is now prey, pinned down by an invisible force. This was no accident. It was the calculated result of a complex system, one that could turn a single whisper over a radio into synchronized destruction. This was the American artillery machine. We will deconstruct it, tracing the entire kill chain, from the eyes of a single forward observer, through a web of radio nets and fire direction centers, to the synchronized impact of an entire battlefield's guns. This reveals a fundamental question of the war. How did field artillery, a weapon never intended for dueling with tanks, become one of the most effective counters to Germany's elite panzers? But to understand the genius of this solution, we must first examine the terrifying problem it was built to solve. The terrifying problem was a crisis of steel and confidence. By the summer of 1944, American soldiers were confronting a new, horrifying reality on the ground: German heavy tanks. The M4 Sherman, the workhorse of the Allied armies, was reliable and available in vast numbers. But in a head-to-head fight with a German Panther or Tiger, it was a death trap. American tankers watched in disbelief as their 75mm shells bounced harmlessly off the thick, sloped armor of the enemy. In return, the formidable German 88mm gun could pick off a Sherman from a kilometer away, long before the American crew was even in range. This created a tactical stalemate and a psychological crisis known as tank panic. The Germans had invested in technological masterpieces, elite weapons designed to dominate the battlefield. They gambled on quality. The American High Command knew this, but the U.S. response was not to rush a bigger, better tank into production. That wasn't the American way of war. Instead, they had placed their bet on a different philosophy. The answer to a superior individual weapon was not a more superior weapon. It was a superior system. While Germany perfected its predators, America perfected its industrial and logistical machine. The true American superweapon wasn't a tank. It was the ability to produce and deliver an avalanche of material. It was a doctrine that saw the entire battlefield as a single, interconnected system to be managed and controlled. But a doctrine conceived in the quiet of a command post is one thing. Applying it in the claustrophobic, blood-soaked hedgerows of Normandy, that was the real test. And the system's first major trial was about to begin. The test came in countless desperate moments. A lone American lieutenant, a forward observer, peers through his binoculars from a muddy ditch. He spots them, 3 German tanks and a platoon of grenadiers, assembling behind a hedgerow, preparing to attack. He has no anti-tank guns, no immediate air support. He has a map, a pair of eyes, and a radio. His call for fire is short, almost clinical. A grid reference, a type of shell, a request for fire for effect. The message crackles into the battalion's fire direction center. Here, in a cramped tent, a team of specialists translates his request into a language of numbers: azimuth, elevation, charge. Within 3 minutes, the order is on its way to a battery of 100 5mm howitzers. The sky over the German position rips open. The high-explosive shells don't need to penetrate the panzer's armor. They detonate around them, suppressing the infantry support, shattering periscopes, and rattling the crews inside their steel coffins. The attack is smothered in its cradle. The tanks, now blind and alone, are forced to pull back. A single observer had stopped an armored assault without a single tank-on-tank shot being fired. The concept was proven, but to halt an entire panzer division's breakthrough, this simple mechanism would have to be scaled into a ruthless, battlefield-wide system. This ruthless system began not on the gun line, but in the nerve center, the Fire Direction Center, or FDC. Often just a tent or a sandbag dugout, it was a pocket of intense intellectual calm amidst the chaos of war. Inside, under the glow of a few weak bulbs, a team of men worked over maps covered in celluloid overlays and arcane markings. The air was thick with the smell of damp canvas, sweat, and the constant electric crackle of the radio. These men were the battlefield's mathematicians. When the observer's call came in, a set of grid coordinates, they didn't just relay it, they processed it. Using slide rules, graphical firing tables, and data on wind speed, air temperature, and even the chemical composition of the day's gunpowder batch, they translated that single request into a precise firing solution. They calculated the azimuth and elevation for each gun in the battery. They specified the type of shell, high explosive, smoke, or white phosphorus. They determined the correct powder charge to send it the exact distance required. This wasn't just aiming, it was applied physics, performed under extreme pressure, where a single decimal error could mean missing the target by 100 yards. From the FDC, the firing solution traveled by field telephone or radio to the gun positions. Here, among the 105mm or heavier 155mm howitzers, the crews worked with a discipline born of endless drilling. They never saw the enemy. They didn't need to. Their world was the gun, and their god was the voice on the phone. A gun chief would receive the string of numbers. Battery adjust, shell HE, charge 4, azimuth 2800, elevation 350, and bark the commands. The loaders would ram the shell and powder charge into the breech. The gunner would crank the traverse and elevation wheels, aligning the needle sights with the numbers on the dials. They placed their absolute faith in the unseen calculations of the FDC. When the command, "Fire," was given, they pulled a lanyard, and a 33-pound shell of American steel began its silent, arching journey toward a target they would never see. But firing one battery was simple. The true genius of the American system was its ability to scale. The ultimate expression of this was a technique known as time on target, or TOT. A single observer's request could be routed not just to his own battalion's FDC, but to the FDCs of multiple artillery battalions, sometimes spread miles apart. A division could have over 70 guns at its disposal. Now the calculation became exponentially more complex. Each FDC had to compute the flight time of its shells to the target. A 105mm shell from a battery 5 miles away would have a different flight time than a 155mm shell from a battery 9 miles away. The central command would then assign a specific time of impact, for example, 09:43:00. Working backward, each FDC calculated the exact second its guns needed to fire. A battery farther away might fire at 09:42:35. A closer one might fire at 09:42:48. The result was an artillery symphony conducted by radio. Dozens of shells from different locations with different trajectories all converged on the same grid square at the exact same second. From the German perspective, it was incomprehensible. One moment, a column of tanks and half-tracks is advancing through a field. The next, the entire world erupts. There is no whistle of incoming shells, no time to react. The sky just falls. A German officer from the Panzer Lehr Division described it as an artillery storm of unprecedented intensity. Reports back to German High Command were filled with a sense of shock and awe. They noted the terrifying speed. From the moment an American observer spotted them, it was often less than 3 minutes before the first shells landed. They noted the incredible concentration, describing how entire grid squares were systematically erased by a carpet of explosions. The fire shredded supporting infantry, destroyed supply trucks, and severed communication lines, leaving the mighty panzers blind, isolated, and increasingly hesitant to advance. The psychological impact was devastating. German soldiers weren't fighting an army, they were fighting an invisible, all-seeing machine. The Americans believed they had created the perfect counter to the Panzer. The Germans, paralyzed by this Feuerwalze, or rolling fire, seemed to agree. The legend of the tank-killing artillery was born. But when the fighting moved on and ordnance survey teams walked the silent, cratered fields, the evidence they gathered would tell a very different story. That different story was written in cold, hard data. After the fighting subsided, Allied operational research teams combed the silent battlefields, methodically analyzing every piece of knocked-out German armor. Their conclusion was a shock. The number of heavy tanks, Panthers or Tigers, confirmed destroyed by a direct hit from field artillery, was almost non-existent. The system's true power wasn't annihilation, but paralysis. The storm of steel fragments shredded tracks, shattered expensive optics, and concussed crews inside their steel hulls. Forced to button up, a tank commander was now blind. Most critically, the firestorm vaporized the tank's ecosystem, the grenadiers who protected its flanks, the half-tracks carrying ammunition, the fuel trucks that kept it moving. The Predator was isolated, its offensive power methodically dismantled. But could a strategy of neutralization stop not just a probing attack, but a desperate full-scale offensive? In August 1944, near the French town of Mortain, that theory would be tested against the concentrated fury of an entire SS Panzer division. August 7, 1944. Before dawn, Hitler's last desperate gamble in Normandy begins. Operation Lüttich. The elite 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, surges forward, aiming to punch through American lines and sever the Allied armies. But they weren't met by a wall of tanks. They were met by an invisible storm. From hilltop observation posts and the cockpit of a single Piper Cub spotter plane, calls for fire flooded the network. The system, now operating at peak efficiency, sprang to life. 9 separate American field artillery battalions, over 100 guns, were coordinated against the German advance. Time-on-target missions crashed down on assembly areas, crossroads, and approach routes, smothering attacks before they could even begin. In just 24 hours, over 19,000 shells fell on the 2nd SS. The Panzer spearhead wasn't defeated in a grand tank battle. It was systematically dismantled, paralyzed, and broken by an unseen, perfectly coordinated machine. The advance was shattered. And this brings us back to where our story began, to that lone tiger trapped in a field under a sky that suddenly fell. We can now see the fate of that Tiger crew in July 1944 for what it was. They weren't the victims of a random barrage, but of a precisely calculated time-on-target strike, the end result of a single observer's call, translated into mathematics by an FDC and executed by guns they would never see. This story reveals a fundamental truth about the American victory in the West. The goal was never simply to build a better tank than the Tiger. It was to build a better system. A system of observation, communication, and logistics that could find, fix, and neutralize a technologically superior weapon. The American answer to a masterpiece of engineering wasn't a rival masterpiece. It was the overwhelming power of organization itself. In the end, the war's most formidable predators of steel were often defeated not by a bigger shell, but by the quietest of weapons, a single voice on a radio.